In Python, there are several numeric conversion types. A numeric conversion function basically converts a number data type from its original data type to a new data type. Depending on the data type, you can convert an int to a float to a long, which would get rid of the decimal value, a float to an absolute value, which returns the absolute value of a number. The return value may be a plain or a long integer or a floating point number if the number is a complex number. Its magnitude is returned. The magnitude of any number is usually called its absolute value. Let's take a look at how to utilize the conversion functions within Python. So let's go to File, New, and create a project. And we're going to create a Python project. So we select Python application. I'm going to give it the name Code Snippets. And I'm going to keep the location of where the project is saved. Now I have my Python project called Code Snippet, and I want to add by selecting right mouse click, selecting the code snippet or the name of the project, do a right mouse click, select Add, select New Item, and the Add New Item dialog box should pop up. I want to select Empty Python File, and an empty Python file is created for me. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. And I'm going to give it the name Numeric Conversion Functions. I'm going to start out by creating a variable, and I'm going to call my variable tax. Now let me create a variable which will contain an actual floating point. So I'll call this variable floating point tax. And I'm going to utilize an actual tax of 8.5, naturally put it over 100. And now I'm going to purchase me some shoes. So I'm going to create a variable which contains the price of the shoes. And the shoes will cost $100 plus 50 cents. Now I want to naturally multiply the tax times the cost of the shoes in order to get the total tax. So now I have the total tax calculated by multiplying the price of the shoes times the actual tax. And now I want to get the total that I have to pay for the shoes. So I get the total basically by taking the price of the shoes and adding the actual tax amount to get the total of what I'm paying for these shoes. Now I want to create a series of print statements utilizing the actual conversion functions in order to display the calculation that happens within the actual conversion function. Now I want to create a series of print statements which will display the operation of the function or operating on the actual total amount of my purchase to identify the end results. So I'm going to say print the total cost of the shoes are, I'm going to identify the actual print statement with a comment or with a inline identification. And naturally, I have to, because of the print function, I have to convert the actual amount into a string. So I'm using a str function which converts anything into an actual string, or any object into an actual string. So I'm going to use my string function. I need to make this correction. Don't forget to use the concatenation operator, the plus sign. I'm going to write another statement. And this one will show the float data type by using the actual float function. Again, remember, I have to convert everything into a string, and I'm using the actual float function inside of the string function. So I have a nested function. Put my colon there. Now I'm going to utilize a long So now I have identified and utilized two of the conversion functions. I've utilized the float and I've utilized the long. Now there's another conversion function that's called absolute. And naturally, in order to identify the operation of absolute, the best way to do so is to return a negative number and then apply the absolute conversion function to that negative number and convert that negative number into an absolute number. So I can do so by creating a variable called FLT money, and this variable will represent the amount of money that I gave to the actual cashier. So naturally, if I gave the cashier $1,000, and in order to generate a negative number, I'll create a variable called negative amount, and then I will subtract the total amount from the actual money that I gave the cashier. So this should create a negative number stored in the FLT negative amount. Now I want to begin a series of print statements in order to identify how the absolute function operates. Plus str. Naturally, I have to convert it into a string in order to work with the print statement in line. Okay. And I'm going to create another print statement because we're going to put a breakpoint on this particular print statement, the last print statement. So I can go ahead and copy and paste the last print statement for line 13. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste it on line 14. and then I'm going to create or generate a breakpoint by clicking on line 14 in the gray area of the vertical bar. So now let's take a look at the code. Line 6, our first print statement, should write out the original value without the value being converted. That value should be a string, but initially the value is an actual floating point. Then line 7 should do a conversion of that value, which is a floating point, and should maintain the integrity of that value, which is converting a floating point into a floating point. So that's more for clarity as opposed to effect. So line 7 should generate a floating point. Line 8 changes that floating point into a long, so it should truncate the actual decimal point value. And then I created my dollar amount and made a calculation to generate a total number. Made a calculation to generate a negative number. Then line 12, I write out that negative number for validation that it is a negative number. And then line 13, I actually utilize my conversion function called absolute to negate or return the absolute value of the negative number, which is primarily a positive number. So I'm going to go ahead and save my work, and I'm going to do a right mouse click, and I'm going to select debug a script. I got an error, so let me close out and go correct my error. Now, after making some corrections to my misspelling of my FLT total, I had FL total as opposed to FLT total, I'm going to go ahead and place a breaking point at line 14. Then I'm going to select my file and do a right mouse click, and I'm going to say start with debugger. So that should go ahead and print all the lines out. If we take a look at line 6 is the first line that's actually shown in the command display. So the first line code-wise says print the total cost of the shoes and it shows the original data type, and original data type is $109.04. Line 7 shows the actual same thing, but I'm utilizing the floating point conversion, and I basically get the same number. Line 8 shows the third line, whereby the actual decimal point is truncated simply because I am utilizing a long conversion data type. Then I go to my calculation of having money and subtracting the amount that I have from my total amount. So that generates a negative number of $890.95. So then line 13, which I am utilizing the absolute conversion function, displays the last line. And if you notice, the last line is $890.9575. So the actual negative symbol has been removed and the number is now positive. So I can go ahead and stop debugging, and thus that demonstrates the conversion functions associated with numeric values: float, long, and absolute.